This is the 40 Thrive Podcast, episode 14.
You're listening to the 40 Thrive Podcast, the show created for women 40 and beyond, ready to shake things up. Get exclusive access to expert advice, support, and strategies that will inspire, motivate, and give you the tools to not just survive, but thrive. And now, your host, Jackie McDougall.
Welcome to the 40 Thrive Podcast. Today's episode is very special to me. Dani Klein-Modisett is here. She's the founder of Laughter on Call, an organization she created after seeing her mother, who has Alzheimer's, benefit from comedy care. Alzheimer's is something that I have also seen up close, as my dad was diagnosed several years ago and passed away from it just 3 years ago. It is like no other. And I have seen a lot in my life, and I've never seen anything like watching my dad go through Alzheimer's. So to see someone like Dani, who also is experiencing this horrific disease in her family, to use her passion to find purpose and to help her mom and so many others, it's just such an incredible story. And I couldn't wait to get her on the podcast to share with you. So Dani's been working as a comedian for over 20 years. With her shows, books, and teaching, she's brought laughter to the biggest changes and challenges in our lives: marriage, parenting, and now senior care. Dani taught the art of stand-up comedy at UCLA for over a decade. She's produced numerous live comedy shows all over the U.S. Her positive, upbeat personality encourages everyone who comes into contact with her. But Dani doesn't just work with seniors. She has published books like Afterbirth, Stories You Won't Read in a Parenting Magazine, which is an edited anthology of stories that focus on laughter and the family life. She's also written Take My Spouse, Please, a how to laugh more in your marriage book that works. We're going to have her back on to talk about that one. Now, if you are experiencing Alzheimer's in your family, in your life, in your community, with someone you love, this episode is especially for you. The hope and the laughter and the beautiful experiences that Dani shares about her organization and what it does for Alzheimer's patients is something everyone needs to hear. Because as we get older, as we move through this phase into the next phase of life, we need laughter. We need hope. We need community and connection. And what Dani is doing provides all of that. So let's just get into it. Dani, welcome to the 40 Thrive Podcast.
Thank you.
I am so excited that you're here. I have related to your story with your mom's Alzheimer's for years now.
Oh.
You know, kind of like watching you on Facebook. My dad passed away from Alzheimer's 3 years ago.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. And it's just, it's something that unless you go through it, you can't even describe it to other people. Like they just would never understand. When my dad was going through Alzheimer's, it was very difficult having him in Boston and being in California. And like me, you were living across the country from your mom with Alzheimer's, with you in California and she in New York. But you made a huge decision to change that.
Right. Because I had moved her out here after she was born and raised in Manhattan, and like that was her world. And I just made the decision that it was going to be way more, I don't know, it's not efficient, but just like better. I don't know. I don't have a fancy word for it. It was just going to be better for her to be near me and my family and not spending $17,000 a month to live in New York City and never leave her apartment. That didn't seem smart.
Right. And so you brought her out to California.
Right.
And found a place appropriate for her.
Yes. I love this place. I'm a big Silverado person. They don't pay me to say this, but they have a specific philosophy of turning fear into love, and the founders wrote a book about their approach, and it's like minimal drugging and total acceptance. And wow. It's a super social environment, which was appropriate for my mother. It's not appropriate for everyone, I guess, but for her, she was a big extrovert. So for her to be surrounded by dogs and kids and lots of activities and a real open floor plan was really great.
Let's talk a little bit about your mom before we get to the fact that you found this incredible way to connect with Alzheimer's patients. What were you going through when you brought her out here and then she was sort of in your everyday life versus being back in New York? And I know for me, having my dad in Boston, I felt helpless. I mean, I
Right.
could go and visit, and I had to make a decision about 6 months before he died that I was no longer going to show up as his daughter because he didn't know me as his daughter,
Mm-hmm.
but I was going to show up as someone who would bring a little bit of light into his life. I wanted to be someone he enjoyed. I
Right.
wanted to be someone, I had just given up on the idea that he would ever remember again. And I just wanted to be a positive person in his life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which was actually quite freeing for me because it helped me let go of some of the pain of wanting him to remember me.
Mm-hmm.
But how did that change? Like, where were you as far as when she was in New York, and how did that kind of change for you in moving her out to California?
Well, so when she was in New York, she had 24-hour care with a geriatric care manager. And I managed that whole team from the East Coast. And it was dramatic because for, a multitude of reasons, but not the least of which was they would be in the other room and she would say, "There's nobody here. I'm by myself." And I'd be like, "Wait, what? How could that be?" So there was so much that misinformation, like unreliable narrator from her, that it would cause a lot of stress. Or, she was still trying to go to things and then she would get there and freak out and then scream. And, it's very terrifying for them to be so disoriented. And so there's a lot of high drama. And then it was always like phone calls all day Saturday or, it was very out of control. And then at one point we had someone who wasn't a trained caregiver, and then she, you meet a lot of people in this field who are working stuff out with their own parents that they never resolved. People who want to work with seniors, there's sometimes a thing that they're trying to work out. And this woman had she just took over in a way that was uncomfortable and lacking in boundaries and would do things with my mother and not tell me. And that was really uncomfortable for me. And so at a certain point, I just said, this has to stop. This isn't good. And I started looking at facilities out here. I actually flew to Boston and looked at some facilities there because my sister lives there. Mm-hmm. And the one that she found was on a cul-de-sac, and it just felt like my mother was going to be super isolated there when the snow hit. And and then additionally, in Massachusetts, they're not allowed to feed at the homes.
Oh.
So when the person progresses to the point where they need to be fed, then you need to hire an extra person to come in and feed them. And so that was just a prohibitive expense. That just seemed not like a good idea.
Right.
So I decided to move her here, and I got 3 seats on a commercial airline, and I hired a caregiver to fly with me. And I went to New York on a Friday, I believe. And I went and saw her. I went over and she was in the fetal position in her bed. And it was 11 in the morning. And she was ashen and just, I don't know, looked like a female Ebenezer Scrooge, as you would envision, all like a little hawk in her bed. And I came out of the room and caught my breath. And I was like, oh man, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe she's going to die or something. And they were like, well, I guess it's up to you. They didn't want to lose their jobs. God bless them. So there was a lot of pushback for me doing this. But I said to my mother, okay, Mom, I'm coming back tomorrow. We're going to go see your grandchildren. So I need the boys. She still knew the boys. And I said, so, we're going to leave in the morning, get on an airplane. And she was like, oh, okay. And then I came back the next morning at probably 9:00, and she was dressed and ready to go in her wheelchair, ready to go with a hat on. And
wow.
They said she'd been up since 6. And, we just literally went with God. It was just a crazy, crazy day. And along the way, I had this miraculous cab driver. They were so nice on the plane. It was really miraculous. The whole experience coming over was miraculous.
Wow. And that's, that's not common to have all that support from cab drivers to flight attendants or other fellow passengers. So, I mean, it sounds
No.
like there was some intervention there somehow.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, to be honest, like I did get some dirty looks from other passengers because, she clearly was not in control. And, but that was okay. And I don't know, there was one point where it felt like it was really going to fall apart. Like she was going to be really agitated. And I just got down on my knees in front of her and I looked her in the eyes and I just kept saying, I love you and it's going to be okay. I just kept repeating that like a mantra and she calmed down and we got here and my kids were at the airport and my husband was there. My sister flew in from Boston. So, and then we brought her over to Silverado and it's a beautiful place. Like it looks like a fancy hotel. So, and my mother was a very always aspirationally fancy person. Mm-hmm. So at first I think she just thought, oh, I'm staying in a hotel for a couple days, and then as the month progressed, she became more aware that she wasn't leaving, I think, even though I had tricked out her room. I bought all fancy furniture and all of her, special paintings. And I'd brought as much of her as I could. And that's actually when I got the idea for Laughter on Call. Like that's when when that started to fall apart. I was at my dentist who is like, I have like this dentist / life coach. Like she's always telling me what to do.
Only in LA.
Right. And she's like, she's an excellent dentist, but she does, I think, fill the dead air while she's working with like, lots of philosophizing and advice. And I said, I was really upset at that point because I felt like, oh my goodness, like I'd uprooted my mother and now she had like stopped eating and was really withdrawn. And I was like, wow, I guess I really did make a big mistake. And I was like, and because I've been a comedian for 20 years and taught comedy and wrote a book on the importance of laughter in marriage, like laughter is, my way through life. And I said, man, I just wish I could hire a comedian to cheer my mother up. And the dentist, Dr. Messman, she was like, well, why don't you? And I said, wow, I don't know. Like, can you do that? Can you what do you mean? And I was like, aren't I supposed to go to an agency or something? And she was like, no, why don't you just ask around? And so I went home and I put up on Facebook looking for comedian interested in gerontology paid gig. And my phone rang like 2 minutes later. And it was my friend in New York, Amy Stiller, from a long line of comedians, Stiller and Mira, and who I've been friends with since we were in our 20s. And she was like, oh my God, I just got off the phone with my friend, Sue, who lives in LA, and she wants to work with seniors, and she's a comedian. And
that's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing has been like this, though. So I called Sue, and she's really funny woman and really New York, which was very familiar. And so she came over and she met my mother and she just got right in her face and was completely honest and was like, hey, what's going on? I bet you don't want to talk to me, right? You don't want to talk to me. You're thinking, who is this schmuck just in my face talking to me? And when the minute she said the word schmuck, my mother's face just lit up and she started giggling. And they were kind of off to the races. And then she kept saying it like any good comedian when you get your laugh, and then she gave her some water and they had this connection. And so I immediately hired her and I was like, okay, you're going to come 8 hours a week and do what you just did. Just keep doing this, find ways to do this. And, within a week, my mother's temperament changed. She was eating, she was engaged with the community, she was singing, she was so much more alive. She'd really been restored. And I said to Sue at the time, I know there's something here. There's something profound here. And I think it's a business, but I don't know if I'm going to do it, but there's something very important. And she said, okay. And then a week later, another family approached her and said, hey, we see what's going on there. We want that for our mother. And so, fortunately, she came outside and she called me and she was like, well, if you want a business, you're in, you got one.
Wow. Now, this is the point, though, that a lot of people, especially women over 40, would say, I hired this comedian. It was so effective. I could have a business. That's too much. Or I have young, you have two teenage boys, right?
11 and 16, right?
Okay. So, you've got enough on your plate. Like, who has time to create a business, or all the self-doubt, all the I'm not good enough, whatever it is. So what made you go, you know what? I'm going to move forward with this?
Well, I mean, necessity being the mother of invention, I'm, always looking for work that I enjoy. And I've done a lot of different things. But the evidence of this was so undeniable. And it's such a growing field that, like, as I said, I wrote this book about marriage called Take My Spouse, Please. Mm-hmm. And it's very funny. It did well. I did like a 16-city tour. But, there's a lot of marriage counselors out there. It's a field that is pretty full. There's a lot of people with a lot of ideas about how to save your marriage. This was something that I was like, wait a minute. Like, this is a sector of our culture that is growing and growing. And my experience was, boy, do these people need a laugh. Holy cow. Like, from the top down, like the staff, the families, the people with the disease, like, it just felt like a whole terrain where I could actually make a difference, which, maybe that sounds pompous or whatever, but
not at all.
I know a lot about this field. I taught stand-up for 20 years. I taught at UCLA. I have a curriculum. As I said, like, I work with couples. I've worked with congressional candidates, like political people, to try to get them to create some humor and connection. Like, this is an area that I am an expert in. And I was like, and there's no expert in this area in Alzheimer's, because who would take it on? Because it's ridiculous. But
well, I would never think that, because of the lack of ability to kind of grasp some concepts or whatever, how do you approach it differently so that way they can enjoy the comedy?
So there's a couple things. What ended up happening is I got more private clients, and then I went out and started pitching to different executive directors in town to get more people and to get more families. And one in particular said to me, yeah, I see what you're doing. Obviously it's great, but I want you to come in and train my staff. And I want you to come up with 4 workshops, 3 or maybe 3 workshops. I want one for my staff, one for my leadership team, and one for families. And you're going to teach them some of these principles that you use. And so that's what I did. I came up with a curriculum. I have a little acronym. It's Pilates. And I say it's Pilates for seniors. And each letter, obviously has a certain meaning. The first one being breathe, and it's very basic, simple tools that I've used to teach, for decades, and applied specifically to this area where there are certain specifics, like the most obvious one. And I'm not the first one to use this approach, but the whole idea from improvisation of saying yes, the yes and. Mm-hmm. That's one of my tools. It's not the only tool, but the yes and is really important with people whose memories are failing, who are struggling with dementia. It just makes no sense ever to correct them, ever. Just say yes. Just probably in life makes no sense, but unless there's facts, right? I don't want to get off on a tangent, but with people with dementia, it is just the biggest gift to just say yes, yes. My son's coming to pick me up in 10 minutes. Yes, he is. Why don't we go get dressed? So it's like this now, of course, I'm kind of coming in a little backwards, because now there's validation therapy. There's all these, therapeutic terms for what I came to from in a different door. I came from the entertainment side, but it turns out it's more than fully supported in the Alzheimer's world. But I systematize it in a way that makes it accessible and doable, and you don't have to have an MSW, and, here, just try these 8 things and you're going to have a better experience. And this is something, my father died of cancer 22 years ago now. And it was brutal and painful and morphine and, you know, as bad as cancer gets. And people came to visit him until the day before he died. And when my mother got this disease, about 6 months in, she was down to one friend who would visit.
Right.
And so it really struck me that people are so uncomfortable with anybody who's mentally compromised. And we really need to get to the other side of this. And I believe, because a lot of people say, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know. And so what I'm presenting is, here's 8 things. Do these 8 things. And then if you still can't stand it, well, at least you came for 15 minutes. Like, I just really believe in like creating courage. You know, people don't have the courage to show up. And that is the crossover and you know, the intersection between comedians and this disease and showing up for this disease is that the one thing that comedians have, even the not funny ones, is they have the courage to stand there and to show up. And that is what's needed in this field, like the courage to show up. So that for me was like, oh, right, that makes total sense that comedians would show up for this and know how to manage it because they're used to hecklers, because they're used to people who are distracted, and they're used to grabbing an audience and going back in and trial and error.
If I'm a stand-up comedian, what an amazing, purposeful way to use my craft is for these people, because you don't need necessarily the big laugh in the room. You need someone to even a smirk, you know, is
Absolutely.
a win. It's just to bring a little bit of joy into somebody's life, you know? So take us back for a second to, you know, now you've gotten this call, hey, we can start a business. Then what happened? Like, where'd you go with that?
So I started with the next client, and then I wrote an article for AARP.
Yes, I'm going to link to that in the show notes. It's so good.
Oh, thank you. I just knew I wanted to reach a lot of people. I've written for Parents Magazine and then LA Times and New York Times, and I've written for a lot of publications, but I targeted AARP for this.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, because your listeners are, you know, there's like a business angle. I'll just be candid. You know, they came back and they said, okay, great. So we're going to send somebody to interview, you know, we'll have someone interview you. And I was like, no. I was like, I'm a writer. Here's my books. Here's all the articles I've written. I want to write the piece. And then they came back and said, oh, okay. All right. You can write it. And it's going to be on the online magazine. And I was like, oh, well, all right. It's still AARP. People are still going to read it. Mm-hmm. So I went and wrote the piece. And I sent it in. And by the way, this is probably a 3-month process. And I sent it in, and which, by the way, for when you're sitting in your office, that seems like 30 years. Like you can't, you know, there's a lot of like, okay, let's send another hi email, checking in. So then I sent it in, and then like probably 3 weeks passed, and she came back and she said, okay, well, the editor of the magazine got a hold of this piece, and now they want it, and they're going to send a photographer out. And so, again, just like that initial email or that initial posting on Facebook where, like, the phone magically rings and the comedian magically appears, this was another one of those things of, like, what? Like, what is going on? Like, now they're sending a photographer, and this is, like, a big feature piece? That's okay. I mean, I literally was like, okay, God, I'll just keep doing this. Like, okay. So that piece came out, and I got hundreds of responses from around the country of like, wow, please send a comedian to Wichita. We want a comedian in Ohio. We love a comedian in Florida. We like a comedian in Arizona. So it was like, oh my goodness. So I, you know, put all those together. I responded to everybody, but I started to realize like, oh wow, this has a big potential. And so I was in a class just for, you know, from the women point of view, I'm a big dance person. I go to a lot of dance classes. And one of the women in my class, I became friendly with, and her mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so she read my article, and she was really, really interested in what I was doing. And she's a big philanthropist. And she was like, okay, I want you to come in my office and pitch this for real. I think I want to invest in this. Wow. And I was like, okay. Like, again, okay. So I went in, I talked to her. I had the whole thing laid out of envisioning, major cities with comedians and Alzheimer's and running it that way. And then she was like, okay, I like it. Then her husband came in and he's like, I love old people. So I kind of had the whole family on board. And then they said, okay, now go away and write up a real business plan and come back and meet with my business people. So I went off, and I do not have an MBA, but I know that Venn diagrams are very effective. I don't know how I know that, but I just thought, I actually thought, what's it going to take for this to thrive, right? So you need people with Alzheimer's. Okay, no shortage of that. And then you need comedians. So probably college towns, urban areas, and then you need money because it's private pay. So I drew up my little Venn diagram and I researched the cities where this would thrive. And it was odd. It was like Minnesota and Bethesda, Maryland, and then all the obvious, New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, Arizona. Those are kind of the ones that really popped. So I then went into the meeting with the business people with a handout, because I love a handout. And so everybody got a Venn diagram, and I just went for it. And then simultaneously, Time Magazine this summer published a dedicated magazine called The Science of Laughter. And it was a whole magazine, like supporting everything I'd ever done in my life with science to back it up.
Wow.
And they mentioned dementia care and caregiver relief, which is, again, where that training that I talked about, like that's a lot of what I'm offering. So for them. And so anyway, I walked in fully loaded, and they basically said, great, we're going to fund this for a year. Go do it. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's where we are. And then
so how many cities are you in now?
Well, right now, so what happened was, you have a big vision, right? And then you try to create the reality. So I had a rep in DC that was really pushing, and someone in Florida that started right away, but the infrastructure was not ready for that. I mean, if we're talking about scaling a legitimate business, I have to set it up so that it's working and everything's in place in the California. We're going to start with California. And so I hired a PR firm. We built a website that just launched. We have brochures coming out. We had to figure out pricing plans. Like, this is like a real business. This isn't like, oh yeah, I'll throw some comedians your way. And there were a lot of legalities that had to be covered, insurance. Also in the state of California is very employee friendly. So, and they have new legislation that nobody really can work as independent contractors anymore. If they're doing the business of your business, they're an employee. So there's a lot. We're still in it. We're still figuring it out. We're in place now. We're firmly launched, but little things come up, all the time. One of the challenges of Los Angeles is that a lot of my staff are working comics. So they book out like it's a waitressing gig. And it's like, well, it can't be run like that because it's a personal relationship that forms with the client. Right. So, these are all these things that we're figuring out. We have a big meeting Sunday with a whole new crew. And I'll go over some of the basics. We're figuring out, kind of the basic training. Right now, I prefer to have people who have experience specifically working with seniors so that they understand the specific vulnerability of that community. Ultimately, I'll be able to train people from the ground up. But yeah, and then I got a call recently to go to Israel that, I didn't get a call. I saw an ad that they're looking for writers with an interesting take on community building. This is for a trip to Israel. And so I wrote, and supposedly I'm going. Like, they just have to do a passport. So, I'll be taking my laughter on call ideas to Jerusalem because, they work. And it's non-pharmacological. And it's really beautiful to witness and be a part of. And it is community building. So...
Well, and it gives, caregivers, family members a little bit of respite, even if they don't get the respite where they get to leave and get a massage.
Mhm.
a little bit of a respite that they get to have some fun. To put a smile on someone's face, already is an awesome thing. But to work with Alzheimer's patients, whether it's your parent or a grandparent
Mhm.
or a stranger, is just, I can only imagine how rewarding it is when you get that feedback that they're actually enjoying it.
Yeah, when they're connecting, I always say, like, I can't guarantee you 100% money back guarantee that they're going to laugh, but they're definitely going to be engaged, and they're going to feel heard and seen, because for the individual, for the one-on-one work, there's a 5-page questionnaire. There's like an intake form for the family that asks everything from favorite food to favorite music to a vacation gone wrong with funny stories or a pet. I mean, the comedian comes in with a ton of information about the person. So, that's what I mean about like trial and error. Like, they're just throwing stuff out there and funny stuff about themselves and about the person. And it just takes that energy that a comedian can bring of like monologuing if you need to, until you see the light in their eyes. And it is super fun when they start to laugh. I mean, I've done it a few, I've gone out there myself, and I had a mathematician, and he was like, I brought in flashcards, and he liked Paul Simon. And, when I brought him the flashcards, they were like my kids' flashcards. So he was super arrogant, and it was great. Like, it was like, 12 divided by 4. And he's like, 3, like annoyed with me, which I just loved, because he was engaged and like remembered who he was for a minute. And,
right. But also felt valued. And I think that that's what I really saw with my dad as, his disease progressed, is not feeling like he was contributing or being of value, or,
right.
And just kind of, it was heartbreaking. And so to give them these moments of feeling like, wow, this person gets me, how beautiful that is.
Right. I mean, we have another client, an older man, and he was a singing teacher and a voice teacher. And this is in the South Bay. And my comedian that goes to him is a singer. And so every week he gives her singing lessons. Like, he thinks that, she's learning how to sing from him, and he feels very much of service. So
wow.
it's fun.
Giving him a job, giving them a purpose is just so
exactly.
key. So until you are scaled and across the country where everybody can utilize your services, do you have even just one tip for families who are in this to help connect them to their loved ones who might be suffering from Alzheimer's?
One tip. I mean, I have a few, I think.
Yeah, no, or the more the better. I just, I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I talk a lot about honesty, and not, which is so hard, because the instinct, I think, for a lot of people is to be like, mom and dad are fine. They're fine. And it's even for the person to be like, I'm fine. And I think the more honest you can be and be fully present and look them in the eye and, talk about some funny time that you had together and see if they connect, and if they don't, move off it. Like, that is another really important tool, is like letting go. And that's in the Pilates, the L is like letting go of the moment. Like, if it's not connecting, pick another moment. Like, and don't hang on. Like, my mother now has progressed to where she doesn't have language anymore. And sometimes she'll look at me and it with like so much contempt. And I'll start to feel really crushed, and I'll turn away for a minute, and I turn back and she's smiling. And so learning to just let go of each moment so that you're available to the next moment. That's a really big one. And you don't really know when they're in advanced stages, like, you don't really know where their head is at, and so to not project and to just be open. And another thing that I always tell people, because it's so frustrating, the A is about like appreciating each other. Just appreciate the person. When in doubt, just say, I love you. That has been the most effective tool. That's what got us cross country, is just, I love you. And I know this is hard and I love you. And that takes courage to say, especially there are families where, maybe saying I love you wasn't common currency in the household. So It's a disease that really does challenge your humanity in ways that nothing else does. And I really have experience with a lot of other things, and this is an opportunity to bring fully your courage and your humanity so that you can laugh. Because you will not laugh. One thing I know for sure, you will not laugh if everybody's trying to pretend that nothing's wrong or that there isn't, if you can't be honest about it, it's really hard to bring laughter into the space.
Right. Such a good point.
I also think we do little basic things like bring a cookie, like break bread, take it back to religion, like just break bread together. And pictures are great. Magazines are great. Just shaking your head. Sometimes, just being silly, being willing to be silly. Again, for comedians and actors, we're used to that. We'll shake our head and dance around, but not everybody's willing to do that. And it really does help. It breaks the moment. It changes perspective. It allows for some levity. At this point, I will just shake my head and wiggle my hands and my mother will mimic me. And so we've had a connection.
Right. And engagement is so key, as far as it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't have to be this huge reaction. Your mom's not in a place where she can express herself in that way, but that you're getting through to her when she's, mimicking you or just responding even with her eyes.
Right. Right.
Which is amazing.
Yeah. It's not, we're just starting to get to a place where we can quantify it scientifically. So a lot of it is anecdotal. There was just a big article in the Washington Post a week ago about this whole idea of a different approach, like finding joy. And we have to. The population is growing and growing. The statistics are insane. We're in California alone, we're up 123% of death from Alzheimer's just in the last 15 years. Like it's just a hugely growing population of people. So there has to be and we can't just drug everybody and warehouse them. Like we all need to learn tools to engage.
Right.
And so people are starting to look to alternative ways to do it. And, that's definitely what we offer. It's person-centric and it can bring a smile. It's not perfect because nothing is perfect. And that's the other biggest, if you want a piece of advice for families dealing with this, it's never going to be perfect. You're never going to have the perfect visit. You're not going to have the perfect time with your loved one, but you might have a couple of minutes that are pretty cool, that are memorable, where you see each other. And that's what you have to focus on. And you have to let go of perfect anything.
Yeah. Appreciating those, brief moments instead of focusing on maybe the 30 minutes that weren't so great.
Exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely. Everybody has baggage in their families. Everybody has, feelings that have built throughout the years and things that you can't talk about or that things that are difficult. And I remember when my dad got to that stage where he no longer remembered all of that, that in some ways I actually leaned in more affectionate and more connected and more, because there was no history. My dad, like for me, and my mom died when I was 3, and
oh wow,
my dad was my hero. And so to watch him go through this was heartbreaking, but at the same time, I had this opportunity to just love on him and not have all that excess baggage and the pain or anything that we had ever gone through. And so I think that if families are able to embrace that person where they are now, it goes a long way. And so I have to say, though, that taking your life and all of your experiences, and I've seen your books, all the ways that you've been showing up in these different creative avenues, the fact that you are taking something with such purpose and bringing your specific skills and expertise, like this is something you can't teach someone to do, like, because a lot of us have this self-doubt, like this is my experience and this is what I love to do. and hey, this is what I'm going through right now. How do I marry the two? This is like a seamless business. I mean, how could you not do this? It's so brilliant. And I think it's the very definition of thriving over 40 is finding how to use your experience and merging it with being really purposeful and intentional with your life.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I've also been, there was so much encouragement, including an investor, like, and I just haven't met anyone who's said no. Like everyone knows the value of, or beginning to know the value of this. And so it's not that I don't have self-doubt. I do have moments of self-doubt, but it has its own life now. That's the thing. It's really not about me. It just has a life of its own. I have a team. I have a CFO. I have salespeople. I have comedians. I have social media. It's like, it's its own entity that I just keep having a vision and sharing. And then we try to realize the vision and we'll keep going until we're proven that it's not viable. But I just don't think that that's going to be the case because there's such an appetite for it and there's such a need for it. So I think if I'm willing to keep showing up, if I can take my own advice and have the courage to just keep showing up for this crazy thing that I never would have thought I'd be doing, I think it has a positive impact. And, a big part for me is that the comedians get paid. Like a big part is that it's a business and it's a service that we value enough to pay for. And that's a big part of my mission.
Exactly. That's huge.
It's not volunteer work. Like I really believe that as a culture, we need to invest in the value of laughter. And so, it's not like, the most expensive thing you'll ever, it's not outrageous, but the gesture of paying for it says, this is what we value. I value this. And that was very important to me because I really value the work that comedians do. And, that's a big part of it for me.
It's amazing. So what can we do as a 40 Thrive community? How can we support you?
Oh my goodness. Well, you can visit the website. You can spread the word. Oh, the website's laughteroncall.com. You can, you're kind of the sweet spot because a lot of us are either, are dealing with parents. So definitely.
It's that whole sandwich generation.
Exactly. So definitely, please tell people about it. I don't have a book yet, but just spread the word. And if you hear of anyone who's struggling, or if you have relationships with any senior facilities, you can say, hey, I heard about this really cool thing. This woman will come in and make everybody laugh and help the community laugh more. And now we do comedy shows. We're doing an April Fool's Day comedy show. We did a Valentine's Day one. We do interactive storytelling. So anyone who has relationships in the senior industry, I'd love to hear from.
Awesome. And I'm definitely going to post that in the show notes and also over in our Facebook community as well.
Okay, cool. It's grown so much. So if you read the article and you're interested, definitely go check out the website because we do a lot more than that now too.
Fantastic. Dani, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Now, if you love Dani as much as I do, definitely you're going to want to share this episode. So whether you are in your favorite podcast app or you head on over to 40thrive.com/podcast, share it with a friend, share it with someone who needs to hear a little hope today and maybe a little inspiration on how to take challenges that we can't avoid and really make them work with our lives. Don't forget to subscribe so next week's episode just shows up in your podcast app and you can check something off your to-do list. How about that? I look forward to talking to you again next week. Take care and keep thriving. Spring has sprung, and with the change of seasons, sometimes comes an increase in vitality. If you're feeling in the mood for a little more personal time, may I suggest Coconut. Coconut is all about providing clean and natural ingredients when you're enjoying your most intimate moments, with or without a partner. Naturally safe products developed by people who are obsessed with quality. Get 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Kokonu. That's 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Kokonu.